pyramids hold so many mysteries, but probably the biggest question surrounding them is, why were they actually built? In this video, we are going to be looking at the evidence which seems to point to them being ancient power plants, which provided energy for the whole of Egypt. So let's get into it. So in order to talk about this theory, I first need to do a little bit of background explanation on Nikola Tesla. Now, for those who don't know, Tesla was a mechanical and electrical engineer who was responsible for many inventions which we take for granted today. He was an innovator and a pioneer of electronics, and as you may be aware, he had a theory about free energy. Tesla's theory was based around the ionosphere. Now, as you can see here on the left, the ionosphere begins around 50 miles up from the ground and stretches up to about 400 miles above the ground. And it's called the ionosphere because it's ionized. The molecules have a charge. Given the right construction, a stream of negative ions could be discharged into the ionosphere and thus creating an electrical current. So you might have seen this image before, but this is Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower. It used the principle that I've just described, and it seems to have been based on the pyramids. Now, in previous videos, I've talked about these weight-relieving chambers, which provide some of the most fascinating mysteries of the Great Pyramid. Well, what I didn't mention was that metal rods were found in this part of the pyramid, as well as in the air shafts, which lead out of the pyramid from the king's chamber. And metal rods were also found in the queen's chamber, descending into the subterranean chamber, and leading out into the space below. Now, incidentally, the Giza plateau is filled with underground water channels which connect directly to the River Nile. And the Great Pyramid was directly on top of one of these channels, so it was a reliable and consistent source of energy. In geology, this source is referred to as an aquifer, and Tesla's tower was also built intentionally above one. Now, if we look at the layout of the pyramid in this way, it seems the whole thing could have been some kind of conduction route from the water source below, up through the Queen's chamber, through the Grand Gallery, towards the King's chamber, out of what we call the air shafts, and crucially through the relieving chambers towards the gold-plated tip, where the negative ions would be released. Now, I'm obviously not a scientist, so that is just a very basic explanation of the principle, but functionally it would have been identical to Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower. As I mentioned earlier, the ionosphere is crucial in essentially completing the circuit, and it's 50 miles up at its lowest point. The Great Pyramid in Giza is only 481 feet tall. Tesla's tower was only 186 feet tall, so surely it wouldn't have worked. Well, there's actually one account about the Great Pyramid which would suggest otherwise. As the story goes, in 1859, electrical engineer Sir William Siemens climbed to the top of the Great Pyramid, which is now actually illegal, but it wasn't at the time. Whilst up there, his guide told him that if he outstretched his arms, he would be able to hear a strange ringing sound. So he tried this, and he heard a strange ringing sound. Then he raised one arm into the air, and he could feel this weird tingling or prickling sensation in his fingers. Now remember, Siemens was an electrical engineer, so this intrigued him. Now, they were at the top of the Great Pyramid for a while, and at some point Siemens pulled out a wine bottle and started drinking from it. Now, why you would take a bottle of wine to the top of a pyramid is anyone's guess, but he did, and he noticed that it was giving him very mild electric shocks. Again, Siemens wanted to understand what was going on, but he had a theory. Next, he took out a slightly wet newspaper that, again, he just happened to have with him, and he wrapped it around the wine bottle, creating what is known as a Leyden jar. Now, just very quickly, a Leyden jar was a device that was used to gather and store static electricity from an external source. It was invented in 1745, and it was used in a lot of early experiments with electricity. So, now equipped with his makeshift Leyden jar, Siemens held it above his head. After some time, the jar became so charged with electricity that it began to generate sparks. This was because of the enormous electromagnetic charge that the pyramid itself was generating. His guides were not impressed, to say the least, and they were accusing him of witchcraft. And this is where I have to refer to a great quote by Peter Tompkins. One of the guides tried to seize Siemens' companion, but Siemens lowered the bottle towards him and gave the Arab, which was his guide, such a jolt that he was knocked senseless to the ground. Recovering, the guide scrambled to his feet and took off down the pyramid, crying loudly. Now, just very quickly, let's look at the materials of the Great Pyramid. Much of the inside is lined with red granite, which was brought 500 miles up the Nile from Aswan. It was clearly a very deliberate choice, but why go through such effort in transporting these massive rocks such a long way? Surely any old rocks would do. Well, red granite is full of quartz, which has enormous potential to generate energy. Now, there's a theory put forward by Wojciech Kopecki that the friction of the granite molecules created by the vibration of the Earth could have gathered a significant amount of energy in accordance with what is known as the piezoelectric effect. Of course, when you look at impressions of what the pyramids used to look like, it's very clear that they were once very different. Well, this white coating that you can see is 2-foot limestone, and it's known for being a great electrical insulator. And as I mentioned earlier, the gold tip is the complete opposite. It seems that every element of the pyramid's design lends itself to being some kind of power plant. The conventional idea of why the pyramids were built is that they were intended as tombs, but they don't actually resemble what we know Egyptian tombs to look like. If we look at the Valley of the Kings, we can see there's this massive complex room with all this intricate decoration and inscription. None of this can be found inside the Great Pyramid, and not to mention no body was ever found inside the king's sarcophagus. It was thought for a long time that Khufu's remains were stolen by tomb raiders, along with much of the valuable material used to build the pyramid. But scientific tests show no chemical sign that there was ever a body present. So if this isn't a sarcophagus, what is it? Well, theory suggests that it would have housed a highly conductive material, which would have been the main driving force of the pyramid's production of electricity. So why is there no sign of it? Well, we know that materials like this can be very valuable, and when places get ransacked, it's the things of obvious value which are the first to go. The pyramid's impressive gold top has long since disappeared. It's even thought by some that the contents of the sarcophagus was actually the Ark of the Covenant, which is said to have been taken by Moses during the Israelites' exodus from Egypt. Now, aside from theories about why the pyramids were built, there seems to be a lot of evidence to suggest that ancient Egyptians had access to electricity, from what we can see in their artwork to temples which are lacking characteristic soot deposits. Now, the soot deposits would point to interior lighting being provided by a fire source. The lack of them isn't necessarily evidence that electricity was used to light these temples, but it makes you think, what other method could they have used as a light source if not fire or electricity? Much of the golden artifacts that have been recovered are so incredibly detailed and have since been found to be gold plated, a process which requires electricity. So if the ancient Egyptians had access to electricity, could this have been the source? Maybe the reason why ancient Egyptian civilization remains so revered and mysterious today is because of what they were able to achieve, being far more advanced than many civilizations of the time. If you've enjoyed this video, then make sure you drop it a like and subscribe to the channel, and to check out this series from the beginning, I've put a link to a playlist right here, and I'll see you there.